Micah, I was working last week and I could feel a disturbance in the force. I hope you didn't make an exception.
Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your host, co-host Micah Shalansky. With me, as always, the legendary Matthew Jarvis. What's going on, bud?
Micah, I am doing good. I'm living the dream, but I'm a little concerned. I was working. I was doing a little bit of mini surge last week, and I felt a disturbance in the force.
What?
And I wrote down in my journal, I said, I hope this means that Micah lowered his fees and I can hassle him for this.
Fair enough. All of a sudden, I'm a discount advisor.
That's right.
Fair enough compared to some I am.
That's a good point.
That's a good call right there. A little disturbance of the force. I didn't realize we were that connected, but apparently... Because there was last week that I had a few exceptions to some very common rules that we lambast advisors for and really say, hey, you got to change these in order to be a successful practice. So I guess this is a true confessions episode.
Yeah, it really is. I have to chuckle, though, on the joke about lowering fees. There was one time, and I can't share very many details because it's confidential, our extreme accountability, but I do recall that one time we had an extreme accountability, and the punishment was, or the incentive was, that you would have to waive the fee for certain clients if this doesn't happen. And it was like I had said like the most offensive thing. Like, I'm not sure there was anything else I could have thrown out there.
Well, it wasn't just waive the fees. It was take your income to zero. Your income will now be zero.
That's potato semantics. But
I like the same thing.
It's basically the same thing. But you're right. Let's talk about exceptions. We're going to talk today about sometimes we kid ourselves that we're making exceptions, but really what we're doing is we just don't have a process at all. And then oftentimes we'll see another advisor, successful advisor, make an exception. And sometimes we use that to justify our lack of a system. So we want to kind of take this from a lot of angles today. Yeah,
so explain a little bit, I'll go through and talk about a little bit what happens, two different incidents, two different exceptions, by the way, in order to chat about. But then, Jarvis, you just nailed it on the head, though, right? It's when we have rules in place, it's not saying there can never be exception, but the exception cannot be the rule. And that's where advisors fall into a trap in. Or they, like you said, they say, oh, well, I never do this. I ran into an advisor just the other day. It says, well, I never do this. And it happened to be something on the calendar. I was like, sweet, pull up your calendar. And then he got this like ghosted look on his face. I'm like, it's on your iPhone. I know it is. Pull it up right now.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm calling you out on it. That's what I'm doing. I'm calling you out. I'm that guy. Jarvis would just subtly pull up your ADV. I'm going to have you pull up your calendar. And sure enough, and I don't think he was lying. I really don't. But he was lying to himself, right?
It wasn't malicious, though. Like, it wasn't deceptive.
Yeah, that's it. He wasn't being deceptive, but he really thought so. He was like, holy crap, I've never looked at it like this. And that's what we have to call out on ourselves, whether it's delivering value to client, whether it's setting appointments, whether it's not doing house calls, whether it's not doing a 3-hour appointment, which we may need to talk about in a little bit, right? So these types of things are really what we need to call out with each other to make sure we're pushing ourselves forward with the value we're delivering to clients.
Yeah, and we also need to understand, and Jocko talked about this at one point. He was talking about that having systems that does not limit our options, it actually gives us more options. And he talked about, and again, dynamic environments I can't comprehend, right? He talked about like being in a literal battlefield where it's literal life and death, there's bullets flying around. And he says, hey, the fact that we all load out our gear the same way, the fact that we all talk on the radio the exact same way, the fact that we have the same like water bottles, all of these things allow us to know where everything's at so that our conscious effort can be used for reacting in real time. And this goes to surge schedule, Micah, and your example of doing a house call that went 3 hours, right? If your normal process was, I'll just do house calls that go as long as they go, you would not have the ability to accommodate this client that we're going to talk about. But it's by virtue of having this process that we're able to make exceptions on the rare case when these exceptions are needed.
So, Jarvis, you bring up like an interesting story. I was talking to another business owner, a partner, and we were going through some things. He built a very successful business, not financial planning, doing a really good job. Well, he came from military special forces. Sure. And one of the comments that he spent 16, 17 years doing this, and we were out talking the other day, kind of chit-chatting, going through some business problems. And he says, you know what, Micah? I would turn this all in for a second to go back to being in Afghanistan with my team and killing people because that was less stress than this. I was like,
wow. Huh.
Yeah, I was like, can't really I don't know where to go with this, but, in his world, because he had everything so systematized, he had all of his team members were pulling in the same direction, it felt like less stress. And what I would argue to say is probably a highly stressful environment. I don't know.
Think so, yeah.
That's my guess here. But it's because he had so many things laid out and he had the right team members and everyone pulling the right direction. So this is another podcast we could talk about is making sure you have the right team, because when you don't, man, it feels like everything's coming off the rails.
Well, so let's talk, Mike, about this exception that you've got, and
Yes.
let's lay the foundation just for everybody who's perhaps there's a newer listener here. Which welcome to the show. Just as kind of a general, though, meetings in your office and my office, right? They run on a very tight surge schedule, so we have designated days and weeks and even time slots where meetings happen. And clients and prospects routinely need to wait weeks or even months to get on that calendar because we do meetings when we do them, not when someone else requests them, right? So it's not at all unusual if a prospect were to contact your office, Micah, and say, hey, I'd like to meet with Micah. I'm willing to pay his fee. And your office says, well, Micah's next availability is 6 weeks from now on Thursday, the 11th at 2 p.m. And if they say, well, I really want to meet with him tomorrow, they'll say, great, Micah's next meeting is 6 weeks today on a Tuesday at 11 a.m. or whatever the time is, right? That's a correct assessment, correct?
Yeah, and it's actually closer to 6 months is generally how far my calendar books out. But that's 100% correct assessment. That's right there. And we really preach this with advisors. You got to have a system in place for your team to make calls in order to be efficient. So you're right? We have our calendar broken out. I do 7 to 8 appointments a day. Here's how the schedule is. And there's no deviation. We use Calendly in order to help incentivize clients and enforce team members where they can't go outside of that system to break the process. Because if I'm doing an 8:30 and then a 9:45, but somebody wants to come in at 9:15, well, it takes 3 meeting slots up, right? So it really kind of breaks that process up in being an effective office. Just like a doctor's office, just like an attorney's office, right? Like any other professional, there's scheduled times to come in. And once you talk about that with clients and explain the benefits, they're good with that. So yes, I run a very tight schedule on my surges with that. So 2 things had come up, 2 different instances, and they were kind of maybe conflated a little bit. So I want to separate them out. Maybe it makes me feel better. So I had a 3-hour appointment, and then separate to that, I had a house call, both the same week. And house call I wasn't expecting at all. So let's talk about the 3-hour appointment first.
No, real quick, let me just jump in here. Typically, your meetings are 1 hour, right?
Yeah. 45 minutes to
never more than an hour because there's somebody 15 minutes behind that person, right? So
that's correct.
Never more than an hour. And house calls, when was the last time you made a house call before this one?
I got nothing. I'm sure it was several years ago. It's been a while. Yeah, been a long time.
Yeah, so these are very much exceptions to the rule, and they're exceptions that we preach right on this podcast that should be very, very rarely, if ever, made. Just as a bit of context, please.
Yeah, very much so. All right, so the first one, a 3-hour meeting. Yeah. So had a client, a very long time client. They moved out of state, and then they kept telling for years that they wanted to come back up to Alaska. I was like, oh, fantastic! Go ahead and book it. All this stuff. And the client Bob was like, oh my God, I'd really like it if we could meet while I'm up there. I said, great, And so now we knew well in advance when he was coming up, so I made my mini surge around that. Right? I was like, well, perfect. We know when he's coming up. I just moved my mini surge dates a little bit because he booked it so far out that we could make all this work. Now, I knew it was going to probably run a little longer, potentially flight schedules, et cetera. So I definitely put him at the end of the day, which worked out well. But then he was like, you know what? I want to review all of my estate planning and try to get with the estate planning attorney on. And I was like, you know what? It'd be a lot simpler for us if we just brought the estate planning attorney in like we normally do, ran everything in our office to do that. So this 1-hour meeting now went to a 2-hour meeting because he came in for the 1 hour, wanted to do everything on the estate plan. Now, kudos to the estate planning that was done and the estate planning attorney. We actually really don't have to make any changes in any of their estate planning documents. Just a fantastic job of drafting. So much flexibility in the trust. Even over the last 15 years, the laws have changed. There's so much flexibility. We're good with all their goals, which is great. But then he's 82. He wanted to review every little piece of it and make sure it's together. So the meeting took about 45 minutes, an hour with the estate planning attorney.
Quick side note there, Micah, for any of our listeners that don't feel they're strong in estate planning, right? And so estate planning is just this incredible value add area, as is tax planning, 2 areas that we're very passionate about. We do have a great master class on the Perfect RIA website that you and an attorney did together on estate planning. So if you're listening to this, and you're saying, wow, 1 hour meeting with the attorney on estate plans just to review them, how would I do that? That master class is a great resource. So sorry, just a little side plug there.
No, it's a fantastic one. Yeah, I really understand that, right? You don't have to be the expert in it, but you need to know the process of it so you can be delivering value that attorneys don't. So we went through that process. We took a little bit of a break, and then he wanted to have his normal review meeting. And like normal review meetings with an 82-year-old client that's doing everything fantastic, it was 15 minutes of finances and 30 to 45 minutes of everything else going on in their life, which is great. I do enjoy that. Well, one of the things I'd found out the day before, Jarvis, is that I thought he was coming up for like an Alaskan visit, right? He was going to come up, see old friends, kind of visit around, etc. He actually just sent us a copy of his plane tickets beforehand. Why, I don't know, but he sent us a copy, and he came in the night before. He was the day of our meeting, and he left the morning after that. He's just coming up for the meeting.
Now, for those of you that have not been to Alaska yet, what's wrong with you? But it is a little bit of a journey. Micah, you may not be aware of this. We did actually have a friend. We were up in Alaska fishing together recently, and there was another advisor there that had come from the East Coast. Great guy, and he says, "Micah, I don't think you understand how long it takes to get to Alaska." As if, Micah, you had never left Alaska. Like,
I've never left Alaska.
I mean, last time we saw each other was on the East Coast, but. Anyway, it is a long trip, right? Wherever they're coming from, they most likely had to go through Seattle, layover, and then head up to Alaska. So it was an all-day adventure to get there, all-day adventure to go back. So for this client to essentially take 2 days to come and see you,
right?
That's really interesting. It's fascinating, right? Yeah. It speaks to the value of being in person.
Yeah, and the value we've delivered over time with the client, right? So I definitely think that was really neat. That was there. And one of the things he had emailed in the night before, and I had missed it until kind of the morning of, is that he'd love to take me out to dinner. Him and his wife take us out to dinner. Well, I already had engagements with my wife already planned, and I was like, ooh, don't want to break those. So I was just chatting with the client saying, hey, afterwards, we had a little bit of time before I needed to wrap up. I was like, great, why don't we just go get drinks and apps? And so we kind of headed over to a nice little Alaskan spot, sat down, we got some drinks and appetizers. But by the time I got done with that, and we had some other team members come with us, which was fantastic. Yeah. But by the time I got done with that, Jarvis, it was 3 hours, right? It was a meeting with the estate planning attorney. It was our meeting, and then it was drinks and apps. It was a 3-hour process of a meeting, which I would never recommend for people to do.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of pieces to pull apart there, right? And maybe this is us justifying the exception, but we need to kind of balance this out, right? So obviously they had designated their day for that, right? So this is where advisors sometimes get into trouble. A client sits down, they're meeting, the topic goes long. Well, this at 1 hour should become a 1.5 should become 2. Well, wait a second, the client has other plans. Maybe they're not assertive enough to say, hey, I have other plans, right? But they were not ready for that. They don't have necessarily the stamina for that. This was 3 specific meeting segments. So while it was a 3-hour block, there was the attorney meeting, there was your meeting, there was this happy hour thing. So I think there's lessons to be drawn from this, but it certainly is not a sustainable model, right? If you started doing that with all of your clients, you would quickly run out of room for clients.
Yeah, just do the quick math on there. 150 households times 3-hour meetings, it's just never going to work. Yeah. So a couple of important things. And again, I could be justifying this, so I'd love you guys our audience to push back on me if I am. One, this goes into the exception rule. How many exceptions can you have to these types of things? And we go for the 5 rule, right? 5 exceptions per 100 clients. Because we're all going to have some type of exception. Now, one of the things I needed to set in a very positive way with the clients is that this isn't a reoccurring thing, right? I love to meet with him. I thought it was fantastic. He wants to do it every few years. You know what? I'm 3 or 4 years from now, I'm happy to have that conversation again. If it was every quarter he wanted to come up and do this, okay, might need to kind of rethink this. And you could be saying with one client, it's not that big of a deal, but with what system and expectations are you setting up? Because that one client knows 15 other clients.
I was going to say, they all know each other somehow. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, that world is so small. In fact, I was at another place in Alaska, and I ended up running into a client while I was there and just chit-chatting with them and whatnot. We ended up spending a little bit of time together, not planned, just kind of happened. And then the next week in mini-surge, it was another client from that town. They're like, well, why didn't you tell me you were in town? I'm like, how'd you know? Well, I know Sue, so it's a small world that these things all come together. And that's the power of when you start making exceptions, how fast they're going to trickle.
Mm-hmm. And it reminds us the importance of having a consistent system, whether that's when you're going to meet with people, who you take out to dinner, how your investment philosophy works, your distribution rates, your fee schedules, right? These things need to be consistent because we want, as consumers, consistency. You want your office to be doing the same thing again and again. Yeah. And again, Mike, it goes back to that exceptions rule, right? You can have 5 exceptions per 100. You can have 5 exceptions on scheduling per year, right? But those need to be very few and far between. And you need to really hold yourself accountable. I was talking recently to Michael Kitces about this very thing. And he told me, and he's going to be on the episode, you'll hear it. He said, hey, listen, I'm not very good at keeping myself accountable to how I spend my time. And so my assistant, his executive assistant, tracks all of his time, and each week presents him with a spreadsheet of how he spent time for that week. So that he has to be honest with himself, right? Same with these exceptions. To your point earlier about the advisor pulling up his calendar. Oh, yeah, I don't make any exceptions. Let me look at your calendar. I'm looking at 12 this week. Right. It's not looking good.
Yeah, so having that accountability is so important this year. Jarvis, one other thing before we move on to the next story that I want to mention. When we were going out with a client, I pulled the team members aside and said, great news. Do we remember what the employee handbook says about socializing with clients? How many drinks are you allowed? What conversations can you bring up? What conversations can you not bring up? How do we discuss things? When they ask a question about their personal finances in a public setting, how are we going to handle that, right? But let's set some real good expectations with the team to make sure it's a positive experience.
Well, that's a good reminder. I guess I hadn't really thought about that as far as when you make exceptions, they tend to be followed by more exceptions, right? Like, hey, if we're going to go out for drinks, well, then you go out for a couple drinks. And then we're talking about politics. And then we're talking about finances in a public space. Like it quickly, one exception starts turning in because you've sort of left the compound, if you will. Like you've gone outside the gates and now everything is an option. Whereas inside the gates, it's very specific settings.
Yes. So just revisiting those rules, right? And say, how do we get back on track quicker? All right.
Okay, second disturbance in the force. I only noticed one, so I'm gonna have to work on my
have to work on your senses there. Yeah. So, anyways, reviewing. So one of the clients that we transferred to another advisor in our team, they've been doing a really good job for him. Anyways, this was kind of the first death that this other advisor is really coming with. The client is on hospice.
Okay.
And so there wasn't a team-wide notification, which was a bit of a miss on our team, right? When a client is in hospice, something like that, it should be a team-wide ring in the bell. Everybody should know. Now, why is that important? Let's say the team member needs to call to follow up on a check or a distribution or a money change or taxes or whatever, and you don't realize you're calling into a situation where their loved one is dying, literally, right, on their deathbed. Okay, do we really need to make this phone call? Can it wait? Are there other things we need to do? What about all the other things you should check when a client is dying, right? So there's a lot of reasons we should have an all team-wide notification when something serious happens to a client.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, also timeliness on following up, right? What might be a let's follow up once a week could be like, hey, we actually need to like get this taken care of today. In fact, you've got an example of that in just a second. Or if, no, we're not going to let just this one float because they might be dead by next week, right? Not to be too flippant about someone's mortality, but there's things that we need to get done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, very much so. So anyways, I found out about that, just kind of generally reviewing some notes. And then when I found out about it, it was bothering me, Jarvis. And it was kind of outside my working hours. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to go into the weekend not have reached out to this client when I found out about it. So I picked up the phone on a Friday afternoon and gave them a call. And kind of a weird, I don't generally like to call clients on Friday afternoons, like to be more personal. Well, this is one thing, this more personal time, but it was just weighing on my mind. He's in hospice. He could die in the next couple days, and I'm about to miss this opportunity to connect, to say goodbye, right, and to make sure that spouse is taken care of. So again, it was another exception, or maybe that should be the rule. I don't know. Anyways, but either way, I picked up the phone and gave her a call. We ended up having a really good chat, and there was some things that she was concerned about, and so it was good to talk with her about it as her husband's dying. Also, when I was reading the notes, one of the things that we look for in our high touches, how do we make their life easier, right? You're going through a difficult time. Easy thing. You know what? If she's the caregiver right now, number one, there's probably caregiver guilt. If you're not familiar with that is, she will not want to leave her husband's side, or the house, if you will, because what happens if the husband needs her? Now, on hospice, you think there's care that's going to be there, et cetera. No, she's not leaving the house. She's just there. So she's not really taking care of herself. She's probably not cooking decent food, et cetera. So we generally have food delivered to their home. And it's an overwhelming portion. So then that way they can save it for the next couple of days. And that way the caregiver can probably have some meals kind of going forward. So it's a solid little value add that you can send in those times. So we took care of that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just, those are tough situations. I know a lot of times, even myself, though I've gotten better over the years, a lot of times as advisors will just sort of shut down on that, right? Like, well, I'm not comfortable with death myself. I don't really want to just like, let me just kind of step back. And that is, Micah, to your point of time to step in and to really look out for that caregiver, not to get a side tangent on estate planning, but that's where a lot of times we see estate plans fall apart, right? Let's pick a husband and the wife, we always say Bob and Sue. Bob gets dementia. Sue is caring for Bob. All the thoughts are on Bob. Well, what happens if Sue dies and all the estate documents say it all goes to Bob? Now Bob, who's got dementia, what do we do now? So there are things that have to be put in motion. This isn't the time, though you may feel like, hey, I'm just going to step back and let this kind of take its course. Like this is really the time to step up and deliver value as an advisor.
You know, Jarvis, we've all had trauma in our lives in some different levels. And to relate to it a little bit, because no one's pain is real but their own, but to relate to it a little bit more on my end, when people came up with something that was helpful, not trivial, not trying to take my mind off it, not how's the weather or how is your day going today, right? Or talking about happy things, but of saying, hey, just wanted to bring you a meal. Hey, just want to say that we're thinking about you and praying for you. Or saying, hey, I noticed that this was an issue and I want to help you take care of it, right? Those are things that are super impactful. Even if they're quasi inside, outside the financial lane, these are heartbeats at the end of the day, and we get to positively affect those.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. So you found out about this client who's on hospice. You give him a call on a Friday afternoon.
Yep. And then as I was reading
things that weren't done. Yeah, go ahead, please.
As I was reading the notes, one of the things that I noticed is that their taxes weren't done. And that's weird for this client. They're generally like on top of things, because I always read the notes before I call a client, just kind of scrolling through to the last meeting just to see what was taking place. And their taxes weren't done. Well, come to find out, long story short, he was the tech savvy one, not her.
Yeah.
And the CPA wasn't getting them the forms to sign because it's just outside of their process. So they're like, well, whatever, you guys can just come pick it up. And she's like, I'm not leaving the house. And I was like, you know what? This is a super simple fix. Just fax me the bloody form. We already had a release of information on file.
Yep.
That's the reason we already get it on file. So I was like, you know what? I already talked to the wife. I'm going to come by and visit them anyways. Fax me the form, and I'm just going to get their 8879 signed. And then that way, then we can get it back to the tax preparer. And so super simple way. They actually faxed me the entire return. When I went over there to visit them and kind of chit chat with it, she had some questions and concerns on the taxes, a little bit more than normal actually for her, which is interesting. But we went through the tax return with her, got all of her questions answered, got it signed, and got it back. And Jarvis, she was so grateful for just taking off one of the little seeming minuscule tasks off of her plate that now she didn't have to worry about.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that, Micah. There's this temptation, right? We just talked just seconds ago about this is a time to step in, to step up. But at the same point, we need to make sure we're not adding burdens to the list, right? One of the things that we talk to all the time with our clients who are going to shortly lose a spouse or who have recently lost a spouse is stressing how little actually needs to be done, right? I had a client recently passed away. It was very traditional. Husband passed away, wife, unexpectedly, wife's there. And we said, great, how is your cash flow? My cash flow is okay. Are you sure? How much money do you have? We kind of went through cash flow, how much money she had in the bank. Okay, everything else can wait. Well, what about this thing? It can wait. What about it can wait as well? In fact, anything at all you get in the mail that has your husband's name on it, just throw it in an envelope, mail it to our office. We'll take care of it. I promise you everything can wait. The only thing you need to worry about is making sure you have cash, and call me in a second. We'll put more cash in your account. Not a problem at all. So to your point, like the tax return thing, like let me take something off your plate. You have this incredible burden that I cannot lift. Let me take something off your plate.
The other thing that I stressed to her too was saying, hey, you guys, your husband has put you in a really good position because he's elected these survivor benefits. Here's your income's great news. You're going to health insurance is going to continue. So there's generally some things that they're a little concerned about. And so I like to kind of address those in the positive, assuming they're all true, right? But address them in a really positive way. Hey, he really loved you. He took care of this. He elected a survivor benefit. And this is what that means for you. And she was like, thank you. I was a little worried about health insurance because she's like, well, I got this other medical thing, but the health insurance is under his name. So when he dies, can I not see the doctor? Right? It's like, nope, let's go through that whole process, right? And let's really talk about that. And then I also told her, I said, hey, I think everything's in good order on the estate planning, but we're going to go through and read everything again just because, and we're going to get back to you on probably Tuesday or Wednesday of next week and just let you know that everything's fine. If not, we will have documents delivered to your house to sign. Now, you don't have to go yourself. Use a friggin' courier. Like, why didn't the CPA just use a courier? Like, charge $20 extra on the return, use a courier and call it a day, right? And let's make their life easy for them. So there's times like this that you really need to roll out the red carpet and to make sure the heartbeats are taken care of.
I want to pull on a thread there for a second, Micah. You had said to the client, I think everything is okay with their estate documents, which I know for you is a manner of speech, right? Just how you communicate. But because you're doing systematic value adds, like you knew for a certainty that the estate documents are fine because every estate document for every client is fine because at whatever period estate planning, and I know just actually as we're airing this episode, right, we're just doing estate planning reviews again for all the clients because we have these systems in place. And that's what I want to stress here. When you hear that a client is in hospice, all their beneficiaries are right. All their accounts are set up correctly. All their estate documents are in order because if that were not the case, we would have already been addressing it. We would have already taken care of it. So it speaks, again, I just want to hit this one really hard over the head, that it's the systems that allow you to go meet with that client in confidence, not scrambling saying, oh, I hope we updated their beneficiaries. I hope the beneficiaries are even on file, whatever the case may be. So these systems are what allows these exceptions to happen.
Yeah, and in fact, with their estate planning, I was able to pick it up real quickly because we just did the value add and just quickly review it before I even chatted with the client. Now we're going to get something a little bit more formalized to her to make sure it's good to go. But that's really, really important to make sure that it's something we get to help with. And then say, hey, and again to your thing, what are all the things that I have to do? It is hard to say, don't worry about it. Grieve, be with the family, etc. These are not things that you need to tackle at this time.
Well, Mike, I feel like we started with exceptions and then took a hard turn into helping clients when they're towards the end of life, which is a critical part of what we do. It's not talked about enough in the industry on how to help with that. But Mike, based on these exceptions, these things that we've been talking about, what are action items that our listeners can take, right? What are things that they can be implementing in their practice today, this week, to put themselves in a better spot for exceptions, for end of life, et cetera?
Amen. Well, one of the things is, do you have a end of life checklist that you're going to run through? When you know a spouse is terminal, when you know someone is passing away, what are you going to do? Not just the soft touches, right? We like to, anytime a client is diagnosed with cancer, especially they're going through cancer treatment, Jarvis, we send them a blanket. We found these great blankets that are just the right weight. Our clients friggin' love them, especially ladies, because they get cold when they're doing like the radiation treatment, when they're doing these other things, etc. So they absolutely love this. We send them like crossword puzzles. We send them some other things that they can do while doing that. It just goes over off the top. So what are high touches that you can do in this process? But what are also the technical things that you just need to roll up the sleeves and do? Reread. And in our process, it says reread. Then it's open parentheses. No, really read every document, right? And just to really emphasize that, I don't want to scan estate planning documents in this case, because once we die, it's irreversible, right?
Yeah, they're locked in, Yeah,
no Ouija board action here, okay? So this is serious. And so we got to really read them and say, make sure we understand what's going to happen, check everything again. Now, to your point, we checked it all, 3 years ago was the last estate planning value add, something like that. So it was up to date then, nothing's changed. We just reviewed it again. So you could say, Michael, what's the point of reviewing it again? Because damn it matters. And so now we're going to read it again. I'm going to look at the spouse in the eyes and say, hey, we checked all of these things to make sure you were taken care of.
Yeah. Now, again, if you feel weak on estate planning, I'm going to give you a 2-part action item. One would be to take the estate planning masterclass. By the way, even if you feel strong in estate planning, I'm going to be willing to go out on a limb, and I'll take a bet on this one too, that you could be stronger, because we all could be. Micah, you and I recently had an advisor who said, well, Micah, you don't understand, I do real estate planning. And then you guys kind of went pencil to pencil, and it turned out we had different definitions of real estate planning. So check out the estate planning masterclass. And as you're looking at the estate planning value add, if you say, well, I don't really have the bandwidth on my team right now, especially because it's October, right? You're going into search to review all these estate plans. This is a great time to bring in a virtual assistant, because a lot of the information you need for the estate planning value add can be done by a virtual assistant. So last time we did our estate planning value add, we had our virtual assistant go through and we gave them specific instructions. We want the date that the document was executed. We want to know who the attorney in fact is, right, from the power of attorney. And we want to know who the trustee is, or executor or executress of the will. That's things that a VA can pull out. Now, can they tell me, hey, are the documents accurate? Are there mistakes in it? No, they can't. That's beyond the scope. But again, if I'm looking down the spreadsheet and it says, hey, Bob's attorney in fact is Bob, which we've seen, or Sue's attorney in fact is someone we've never heard of, which we've also seen, that's going to flag that. So if you don't have a virtual assistant or a team member who can do that, that's a good chance to reach out to our friends at Belay, our strategic partners there. Text the letters RIA to 55123 to get a copy of their ebook. And ask them, when you talk to Teresa, ask her and say, hey, listen, I want to do this estate planning and value add. Who do you have on the team that can help me with that?
Jarvis, one of the things, kind of pro tip, I'm gonna say on this: what happens when you're reading in a document? It's a husband and wife. The husband has passed away. The contingent is on the documents, but you're putting this list together. Who do you list as the primary on the document? Because now the document says husband, but he's dead. Successor is the daughter. Who do you list as primary? Well, what we do, not saying this is the right answer, but this is at least how we do it. We list the husband as primary, but we put parentheses deceased, and then we put the contingent on there. And you could say, well, why? Because clearly they're not the primary, they're deceased. But that's how the documents read. And so I don't want a lot of interpretation with these documents. Write down what it says. Now, if we need to put a note in there because something needs to be updated, well, fantastic, we're going to put a note, but we're not going to put a brain on here, or our team isn't, and say, well, I'm just going to change what the primary is because they passed away. That gives me a false impression of what these documents are.
Yes, and we'll do a whole sidebar on estate planning here. When they go to the bank or to wherever to execute those documents, and the bank says, wait, the primary is this deceased person, we have to deal with that, and we haven't warned the client that, hey, you've got to bring in death certificates and some other things. We're gonna have a problem. Last action item: if you're really committed to transforming your practice this year, and this year is not over by any means. I know it's fall time, it's surge meeting time. Take a minute to go to theperfectria.com and complete our practice analyzer. If you're ever at all curious and you're saying, hey, where do I stand versus Matt and Micah? Where do I stand? Where do I have room for improvement? Go to the Perfect RIA, check out the practice analyzer. It's humbling, so brace yourself. It's humbling. If you don't like what the results show, you can reach out to lifestyle@theperfectria, and we can get you connected with some resources there.
Awesome, Jarvis. Thank you so much for taking the time for this. It's always a blast. And until next time, happy planning.
Happy planning.
Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice.